So again, year 13, another weekly review where we're going to look at OOP, and again I'm just going to focus on the homework answers to review the lesson. So if we begin and we look at the theory question for object oriented program, you're asked to study the code and refer to it in your question. Now make sure you read that. A few people forgot to refer to the code, therefore you couldn't get full marks. So I've got a model answer here in front of me, but again, highlight, refer to the code, and there was, I think, 6 parts to this. We were looking at classes, objects, methods, instant variables, inheritance, and something called polymorphism. Right, so if you've seen this code, the first thing that you'd be saying is give me your definition of a class. This idea that a class is some type of template, and you can see on screen there the player is a template. We move on then to objects. Objects are instantiated or created from this template. For example, if I scroll down here, we've got Messi is an object that's been instantiated or created from the player object. So I'm going to scroll down, just look at Oren's answers here rather than go through it, and you can see first of all there's a mark point there for explaining what classes are, blueprints, and then there's a mark for referring to the example and player. The next is what objects, and again Oren said a collection of objects that act on this data or have been instantiated from the class, and we've got Messi. The next part of the question was methods, and methods are functions associated with the class. So methods are functions which belong to an object. For example, Messi can shoot, 2 mark points there. We move on, and it's instant variables, and they are the variables that are associated with each object that has been created from the class. Oren's worded it very well, which is owned by an individual instance of a class. And when we mean instance, we're talking about an object that's been created from that class. And we've got nationality, team. Inheritance, and again this is an excellent definition, is when you define a new class with little or no modifications to a different class. So a class can inherit both the attributes and the methods of another class. We just pass it in as a parameter and it receives all the associated data. And we've got the example here, forward inherits from player. And polymorphism, and again a nice clear definition, when a method behaves differently depending on which class it is called by. Clear, concise, and we can say here that shoot does 2 different things, which I can't remember what it does. Let's just look. In the player class, shoot just says I have an average shot, but yes, if they're forward, there's an accuracy associated with it, etc, etc. That's the level of detail that would be expected for 12 marks. 1 mark to explain what it is, 2nd mark point to refer it. And we look now towards the simple task. I'll publish this link in the team, but again there's no set way of doing this. It was your own interpretation. All we wanted to do was to gather data and write the file. So this is probably, well, this is what I came up with. The idea that, well, I've got a person class and therefore I can create objects of this multiple times. If I had 1,000,000 records, we just call this object 1,000,000 times. And it's initialized. Note in this instance I haven't initialized it past any parameters in because they're set, so I've just decided to give the self.name, and I've used an input statement rather than passing it in the main program. When an object is instantiated or created, it's going to ask for the name and age, etc. And then in the initializer, slightly different, I've made calls to its own methods just to save me from doing it in the main program. So after you enter name, age, email, it's going to call this repeat data, which effectively prints it back to screen, and then it's going to call its own method save data, which is going to write it to disk. So we've got nothing on disk. We run this here in the main program. It's going to ask how many records. Throw in 2 records, John and Paul, and you should get the idea. Put in these details and blah blah blah. It repeats it and it saves it, and that is the basics of object oriented programming, using a class or a template to create objects. These objects have got instant variables like self.name, self.age, etc. They have methods or functions which they can call. We didn't need to use inheritance. I know some of you used inheritance, for 2 classes, but that's not needed. And polymorphism, we didn't need it. One concept that we will come across next week is encapsulation. When we talk about object-oriented program, we can encapsulate all the complexities within the class, and someone who's calling it doesn't need to understand it. Think about the complexities of the tkinter entry widget class. We don't know anything about it. We know that we just define it, call it as entry. We know that it's got a method called .get and .insert. We don't care about how they work. All that's been encapsulated. Another good way of thinking about encapsulation is medicines. You know, if I've got a sore head, I take a paracetamol. I don't know what's encapsulated inside that. I know what it does. So that's OOP, folks. Have a good weekend, and remember again, we meet Monday.